Hey folks, Sean here, and in this episode, I want to talk to you about where to potentially put your budget as your B2B SaaS product continues to grow and perform better financially. Now, the first thing that I want to talk to you about is to make sure that you are profitable. Now, I know this sounds kind of weird, but there are folks out there that have designed their B2B SaaS products and subsequent businesses to the extent where they're giving away too much. And I understand that might be attractive from a growth perspective, as in it might enable you to grow faster. And in the beginning, you may not know all of the variables and metrics that are important to measure essentially what you're looking at performance-wise over time. But you need to continually measure a number of these things in order to ensure that your B2B SaaS is performing optimally. Now, when it comes to the where to put your budget after you have validated that you can turn prospects into users and users into paying customers, you really want to have a better understanding first and foremost in terms of how well you're performing financially to figure out how much you can put where. Now, the understanding how well you're performing financially should be in an effort to, at its simplest level, take a look at the revenue that you're generating and take off all of your expenses to better understand what the performance looks like after all of that is said and done. But then you'll probably want to break that down into one additional level of detail when you're ready for it. And that's revenue minus your cost of goods sold, which a couple of specific, essentially subcategories of your expenses in order to calculate your gross margin. Now, once you know your gross margin, you can take your expenses off of that, and that gives you your true profitability. But I'm going to talk more about that detail in a future episode. For now, what I want you to really do is potentially stay at that high level. Make sure that what you're doing is performing profitably, or you're at least on a trajectory to become profitable. What I mean by that is you may have some upfront fixed costs that may have been higher while you were not generating any revenue, and you're going to have to make up for that further down the road after your B2B SaaS product is out on the market and selling. For example, despite the fact that I did everything I could to sell my product before I built it, I still ultimately needed to build it, and while I was building it, I couldn't sell it. As such, there was some upfront cost associated with that, and in order to really make the money back overall, then I'm going to need to generate a certain amount of revenue. That revenue I'm bringing in is going to have be profitable at a certain margin in order for me to recoup and recover those costs. But that's the upfront element. In the B2B SaaS world, what's really common is to really look at your operating model from a monthly or annual perspective. And that's why there's so much focus on MRR, monthly recurring revenue, or ARR, annual recurring revenue. But those numbers don't take into account profitability. Now, most B2B SaaS product businesses give you a significant opportunity to generate a very high gross margin, but it doesn't mean that yours is. So what you need to do is break down what is the revenue that you're bringing in and what are your variable costs in order to calculate your gross margin. I've got a template I've built for my B2B SaaS, like early stage products. I will create that into a template and make that generic and then provide a link to that so that you guys can use this to fill in some of these early stage numbers yourself and then calculate your margin. If you have any questions about this, just reach out to me. Let me know what I can do to help. But after you understand where you're at here, then you can start working on things like, ensuring that you're profitable and then your margin's in a healthy area. If it isn't, you can figure out what you need to do in order to get it into that healthy area. But what I really want to talk about in this episode is after you've done that work, right? That's first and foremost, but afterwards is to figure out where you want to put the additional budget in terms of what you're bringing in and how quickly you're growing. Now, as your B2B SaaS product is growing and converting more users into paying customers, you're going to be generating more profitability, or you're going to be generating more proceeds from people purchasing and using your product. My question I want to answer is, where do you put those proceeds as you're continuing to generate them? And this really depends on what you want to do with your product from here, right? And what is your bottleneck, right? Some of the founders out there, you might be contributing technically. As such, you may need less help there. If you aren't, maybe you need more support there. I think one of the two common areas that I see most often is the area of support and then the area of growth. And then I'd further break growth down into sales and or marketing. Now, if you're building a low touch product, which I'm a huge fan of, then online sources, your website and marketing can really do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to bringing you new customers. Things like creating content, optimizing for SEO or search engine optimization. Those investments can produce a solid return. As such, that's where I'm putting the proceeds for my podcast show notes app now. And I'm looking at who I'm going to be adding to my team in terms of what I need them to do in order to be able to grow it. There are certain things that I don't necessarily want to do, but there are things that regarding like in that area that I'm figuring out how I want the process to work. And I'm breaking that process down into steps. So I'm doing the early stage testing to make sure that the process works. So if I'm like SEO content creation or whatever, and there's maybe some component of human is doing work, some component of AI doing some work, either way, I like to build the process, I like to test it myself and verify that it works. Once I know that it works, then I can figure out which components of that I may want to delegate to members of my team. Then I can go forward and figure out, okay, who do I need that I don't have? I can look at the steps that I'm planning to delegate, and I can build job descriptions, or I can hire contractors or whatever around those needs so that I can make sure that that process becomes more of a routine. I could set output goals in terms of how much output that I want to produce, and I can measure the performance against outcomes, which is really the objective, to better understand, am I moving the right needle and in the right way over a certain period of time for the budget that I'm investing, so that I can also measure my return. So anyway, this episode is really about how to make sure that you are performing well enough financially as your product continues to grow, and then B, what you might do with some of that budget once you've achieved that milestone.